Jujutsu Kaisen is a manga that is widely known for its variety of exciting and impactful fights, but there are also a number of potentially interesting matchups within the series that never happened. Today's topic is, what if Jogo increased his walking speed to Yuta level and arrived in the room where Dagon was slain by Toji Fushiguro, like 10 seconds earlier? All jokes aside, I will be considering both Shibuya Toji and the full Arsenal version of Toji during this video. With that being said, it's time to pit the curse of the Iron Mountain against the Sorcerer Killer. We're going to start by going over Jogo's feats because his scaling is much more contentious and difficult to interpret than Toji's is. The classic meme is that Jogo's strength is underrated because the skill-based matchmaking in the JJK universe refused to put him into a fair fight. Based on Jogo's most prominent battles, we can definitively say that he's weaker than Gojo and 15-Finger Sukuna, which, as far as I know, is a statement that applies to basically every character that ever appeared in JJK. But it still should be noted that Gojo and Sukuna are so far above Jogo that they each defeated him without getting hit at all, and that's while both of them were holding back. However, the few fights Jogo had against non-calamity grade characters all went pretty well for him. He's able to easily roast Mimiko and Nanako, but they don't scale anywhere, so it doesn't really matter. A more relevant feat would be easily cleaning up the leftovers from the Dagon fight. Jogo defeated Maki, Nanami, and Nobito without any of them coming close to damaging him at all. To be fair, they were all tired from fighting Dagon, and he did sneak attack them. But Nobito very much reacted to and tried to combat Jogo using his projection sorcery before getting fried by Jogo's wall volcanoes. Where exactly this version of Nobito scales is difficult to pin down, but the narrator suggests that he's lost a significant amount of speed, which is his main combat advantage. However, he was still fast enough to get on top of Dagon when he tried to flee from Toji, and this, combined with Dagon comparing fresh Nobito to Jogo in speed, should put Jogo comfortably above Dagon in that category. I would argue that this should put Jogo over Dagon overall, as this would allow him to combat Dagon similarly to how Nobito did, but Dagon won't be able to tip the scales with an uncontested domain against Jogo like he was forced to when fighting Nobito. This aligns with Jogo being the one who put Mahito in charge of the disaster curses based on his potential to surpass them all in strength, which suggests that Jogo had to be the strongest one in order to have that decision-making power in the first place. However, this makes it difficult to say how Jogo would compare to Nobito outside of his domain. Nobito probably has a speed advantage based on Dagon's statement, and he should be able to stack his techniques to move even faster. However, Jogo has a variety of long-ranged and area of effect attacks and the ability to heal himself with cursed energy, which might allow him to overcome Nobito's advantage. So, the scale would be that Jogo is overall above all the other disaster curses, with the possible exception of Mahito using his instant spirit body of distorted killing. Similarly, Nobito is above Hanami, Mahito, and Dagon, unless they use their domains. However, with their domains, he is unlikely to defeat any of the disaster curses. Finally, it is unclear who would have the advantage between full power Nobito and Jogo with no domain. Similarly to Jogo, Toji has a good basis for being well above Dagon overall. He pretty clearly overpowered him and was ultimately able to kill him while Dagon was in his domain, which is a favorable environment for him because of all of the water, and should also have buffed him in some way. Toji did have some help from Nobito, but he was definitely dominating either way, and hadn't even been damaged at the time that this happened. Nobito only interfered with the fight because Dagon was getting beaten so badly that he decided his best move was to run away and stall. It's very unlikely that he actually would have been able to turn the fight around with this strategy, even if Nobito did nothing. So, Toji, overall, had a blatantly better performance than Nobito had against Dagon outside of the domain, because Nobito couldn't actually deal enough damage to defeat Dagon, even if he was outspeeding him and landing consecutive attacks fast enough that Dagon was struggling to do anything. Also, Ranta Zenin believes Toji could have wiped out the Zenin clan whenever he wanted to, just like Maki did. This would definitely have involved defeating Nobito, in addition to the Hei and Kukuru squads. Nobito is 71 years old during Shibuya, and Toji has been dead for around 12 years. So the version of Nobito Toji would have fought would still be in his late 50s at the oldest. It's entirely possible that this more middle-aged version of Nobito was stronger than the one who was well on the way to being elderly. Moving on to the specifics of the matchup, a lot of stuff seems to point to Toji and Jogo being close in overall power. Both of them should be over Nobito and Dagon overall. However, Jogo has gotten the short end of the stick in this comparison due to the nature of Toji's abilities. Dagon was only capable of defeating Nobito with the use of his domain, which isn't an option that Jogo can successfully employ against Toji. Toji is definitely above Nobito without the need for a conditional ability like a domain, so he should also be generally stronger than Jogo. However, Jogo does have one advantage that could allow him to defeat Toji in some cases. The only use a domain has against Maki and Toji would be to attempt to separate them from their cursed tools, which are essential for them to win against a cursed spirit. So, Jogo might actually be able to force Toji to fight him while he's domain amped in order to maintain his cursed tool supply. And if Jogo can attack the cursed tools with his sure hit to destroy them, then that would leave Toji in a situation where he doesn't really have a way to win the fight. This tactic would likely be effective on Shibuya Toji, but Sorcerer Killer Toji has the possibility of having ingested his worm cursed spirit in order to hide his inventory. If that is the case, the worm shouldn't be dragged into the barrier, as Toji states that this method allows him to pass through barriers while carrying cursed tools. This would end up providing Toji with a good opportunity to sneak attack Jogo whenever the domain comes down. It would make sense for Toji to have strategies like this for dealing with domains that could try to steal his equipment, although he might be used to mostly fighting humans that he can kill with his bare hands, so maybe his go-to move is to let his stuff get stolen and then pick it up when everyone else is dead. Another possibility for Toji while he was still alive is that he could go into the barrier intentionally and destroy it from the inside with the inverted Spear of Heaven. This should be possible because the spear was one of the methods that could be used to break open the prison realm. One final point is that Jogo states that the inside of his domain is so hot that a normal sorcerer would die just from entering it. It's possible that this extreme level of heat could have a detrimental effect on Toji, although, based on Gojo and Yuji easily surviving in this environment and Toji's physical toughness, he would need to be in the domain for an extended period of time for this to become significant. And because he has the option of exiting the barrier whenever he wants, Jogo can't rely on this to secure the win. Unfortunately for Jogo, this is pretty much the end of his potential advantages. Another bad look for him is that his firepower might not actually be that great. Even when he low-diffed Maki, Nanami, and Nobito, all three of them actually survived for significant amounts of time, with Nanami being able to get up and fight shortly afterward, while Maki was able to recover after receiving medical treatment, and Nobito only succumbed to his wounds days after being struck down. Toji should just have better cursed resistance and physical toughness than Maki did in Shibuya, with the latter being credited as what allowed her to survive after Jogo burned her with one of his attacks. Maki's awakening took her from being defeated by Ogi up to pretty easily defeating half a dozen combatants who were seemingly around his level or stronger than he was, as well as a multitude of lesser fighters. So Toji is probably at least 5 or 6 times more durable than she was against Jogo, which could mean that even a higher output version of Jogo's flames might not do much to Toji. Jogo definitely has access to higher levels of firepower, but it's possible that he would have to trade in speed in order to use them. The ultimate example of this would be Maximum Technique Meteor, which even 15-Finger Sukuna said would have been able to deal some damage to him, but this attack is so hilariously slow that it doesn't really matter. Sukuna had so much time to avoid this attack that he went down and put the Fear of God into Kusakabe and Panda so that they would have a harder time dodging the meteor, and both Kusakabe and Panda were still able to evade this attack well enough that they survived the blast, even with Sukuna's interference. Based on this, it seems very unlikely that Toji would ever get hit by the meteor in a 1v1 battle. Against someone else, Jogo might be able to make it the sure hit of his domain, similarly to what Hanami was going to do against Yuji and Todo, but that strategy won't work on Toji because domains cannot target him. On the other hand, it was basically stated that Jogo has lesser durability compared to Hanami, who was capable of being damaged by strikes from Yuji and Todo. Yuji in Shibuya had his striking compared directly to Nanami by Ino, and then Nanami went on to struggle to deal damage to Dagon in that same arc, describing hitting him as feeling like he had endless health points. Even with Playful Cloud, which should just deal less damage than the Soul Split Katana, Toji then bullied Dagon and ultimately killed him, so he should definitely be capable of dealing fatal damage to Jogo as well. The only way to push back on this would be to say that the statement about Jogo dying to the Black Flash Rush that Hanami endured is wrong. There is a niche argument that could be used to take this position. It relies on the fact that Infinity is low output compared to Blue and Red, and that Hanami was crushed to death by Infinity. Sukuna could not fully neutralize Gojo's Blue or Red using domain amplification during their fight, but he could consistently use it to get through Infinity. This suggests that Gojo could not amplify Infinity to the level of his Blue or Red, even at the maximum possible output, as if he could have prevented Sukuna from striking him, he surely would have done so. Jogo was struck with a Red and survived, while Hanami was able to be pulverized by just Infinity. So it could be argued that an attack that Jogo tanked was actually higher output than what caused Hanami to get completely crushed and destroyed. However, this argument doesn't really work because Gojo held back on Jogo by a lot because he wanted to get information out of him. Gojo can use a Blue so small that all it does is crush a soda can, so the Red that struck Jogo could have been relatively weak. This doesn't contradict the previous logic about the output levels of Infinity compared to Red and Blue, because that example only established that the maximum level of Infinity is inferior to what can be achieved with the other usages of Limitless. This means that Jogo surviving Red can coexist with the statement that Jogo would be killed by a sequence of attacks that Hanami survived. If the statement is valid, the highest possible durability interpretation for Jogo would be that he has similar pound-for-pound durability to Hanami, but that his reduced body size means taking the same attacks would destroy a larger percentage of his body and ultimately result in his death at an earlier time, while Hanami could survive due to effectively having more HP. However, this still shouldn't make Jogo durable enough to survive long against Toji, especially if he is equipped with the Soul Split Katana. To summarize, Toji simply has better assertions than Jogo. He has the feats to place him over Naobito, and this statement that puts him over a younger and possibly stronger Naobito, while Jogo only displayed the capacity to defeat a weakened form of the same character. Further, Jogo has some attack potency anti-feats that put into question if he could actually deal significant damage to Toji, while Toji absolutely has the power to seriously harm Jogo, even without his best weapons. If Toji has the inverted Spear of Heaven to cut through Jogo's Jujutsu, it would become very unlikely for Jogo to defeat Toji, even if his attacks were powerful enough to critically burn him. This is especially true because the inverted Spear of Heaven probably can't be affected by domain expansion, which is Jogo's only chance to win. If Jogo does use domain expansion, it's possible that he would be able to use it to destroy Toji's cursed tools, which would basically mean that he can no longer be harmed by any of Toji's attacks, and then opens the possibility for him to slowly wear Toji down once he's no longer in danger in order to overcome his stat disadvantage. If the situation was similar to Shibuya, where Toji has a limited arsenal, this is likely to work. However, if Toji has his worm or the inverted Spear of Heaven, he could counter this plan. Plus, even if Jogo successfully pulled this off, Toji could still evade his attacks for quite a while, so the strategy does not guarantee victory, except in circumstances where Toji can't run away for some reason. And it is still possible for Toji to defeat Jogo before he uses his domain. This leads me to the conclusion that Toji is an overall superior combatant to Jogo, especially if his full arsenal is available to him. But with that being said, thank you all for watching the video.